Galactic Standard Date. Year 11356. Day 96. Sol Standard Date 4th of the 8th, 3267. Tel-Arctan watched as the three massive Azarians that hung in orbit turned away from her world and started attacking something else in space. She linked into her comm line and called to Mali. Mali, the enemy generals are distracted. Fire off every fucking nuke we have right this instant. Distract those sons of Mel so that whatever caught their attention gets some room to fucking breathe. Mali felt her heart skip a beat at the mention of a new possibility of survival, and she quickly tapped through all of the menus on her PC with 4 of her legs as she multitasked faster than ever before. She greenlit the firing of all 35 or so nuclear missiles that were still active and functioning. The only ones they had left were their last-ditch effort against any more ground invasions, so with their launch, they were now completely defenseless. She watched as plumes of smoke shot up from around their last bastion, and revealed their devastating payloads that were now aimed at the priest that hung in orbit. Tel-Arctan clapped her mandibles together and started laughing with a maddened look in her eyes as the nukes all rose towards the enemy that had been reviving all of the little shit-stains that had killed her family and friends. Great goddess, Lunicia, goddess of love and life and patron goddess of the Torvaray, please grant this wayward daughter one request. Her voice started to tremble and her body twitched slightly. Somehow grant me the power to annihilate our mutual enemy. Grant me the power necessary to rip and tear until it is done. Sylvan took a deep breath and reflected on the basic instructions that Lady Amaranth had forced into his mind. He tried various strategies using a mentally simulated battle against the three behemoths again but came up short. Gritting his teeth and clenching his fists, he realized just how inadequate he was for being called an apostle of not one but 2 gods. He racked his brain for what felt like more than an hour on this, before a smile crept across his feline features. Oh, this might just work. It may burn me out too quickly, but that's a risk I am willing to take. Sylvan gathered up every bit of Veil energy he could muster from the Veil, which was supplying him with as much as he could reasonably pull into himself. As his body was being flooded with the outrageous amounts of energy in the Veil, he grunted with effort, and tried to control the vast amounts of power he was pulling around. He pictured a blade in his mind similar to his old Admiral's saber, and began condensing the energy swelling within into a Veil blade fitting his mental description. The blade slowly began to take shape. As he pulled in the energy to form the sword, he also mentally pictured runic inscriptions that would allow him to utilize certain abilities to their fullest power without a chant. After a full day in the Veil, he had managed to fully create the sword he wanted. The sword resembled an old human scimitar, but the energies that went into it forming the edge of the blade was made of the pale green energies, representing death, and the flat of the blade was formed into a black mass of hatred, inscribed with pale green runes that completed 2 different spells. They were relatively simple. The first one was an inscription that would allow him to change the size of the blade at will, and the second inscription allowed him to call the sword back to his hand no matter what, by shrinking itself and then creating a mini rift that was linked to Sylvan himself. With the blade finished, he reopened the rift and lazily stepped out into the void. The 2 warlords were already there after detecting the early signs of his rift. He brought his new blade in front of him and examined it for a moment as the warlords began to lash out with their limbs. The tentacles that had been hardened and condensed by millennia in the Veil were strong enough to punch through the Cap-class ships of the Terran Imperium with ease, should they get the chance. Those same forces were now bearing down on a pissed, 4-foot edgelord kitty. Sylvan whispered, "Grow." And the blade grew until it was big enough to be called a dagger for Thanatos. He swung it in a wide arc of the outstretched limbs of the Azarian warlords in front of him, and managed to cut through them completely. Though Sylvan could feel a noticeable drain on his power as he cut through them, he grinned as he watched 6 kilometer-thick limbs fly out into the void, with lines of disgusting dark brown blood trailing behind them. The warlords screeched and pulled back a bit to where the priest was waiting. Sylvan flew through the void towards them, and blasted a bit when green energy flowed from the priest to the 2 warlords, and their limbs started rapidly regenerating. He slowed and began watching in awe as little kilometers of tentacle reformed out of thin air. Just past the priest, he noticed some lights coming towards them, and he tried to focus on them. There were around 30 of them, and they looked like missiles. He grinned and decided to make the push to distract the attention away from the missiles. He tossed his massive sword at one of the warlords, and the priest threw up a shield in front of it that blocked his sword. Sylvan chuckled himself when the warlord dashed out away from the priest to get him now that he was defenseless. Whilst the warlord was close enough, Sylvan immediately launched himself as close as he could to the warlord before summoning his sword back into his hand. The warlord looked as surprised as an eldritch monstrosity possibly could, before his head was bisected.